Hello, I'm Jeff Popovich of My Foodie Adventures. Thank you for checking out my conversation with Jon Kung. I'd also like to give a special shout out to my good buddy Logan Tesmer, who helped me shoot this feature last week in downtown Detroit. I started off the interview by asking Jon what being a third culture cook means to him and how it helped influence his style of cooking.
Well, the constant moving around, the constant like shifting between different cultures and our kind of reevaluation of what home and family was all the time. It kind of just when I was younger, it was very difficult because it left me with no sense of real belonging anywhere. As I grew older and as I really started being more confident and sure-footed with my ability to create as a cook, as an artist, whatever, I realized that immersion, that like just day to day switching between a base culture of your home, which in my case was Chinese, and then the outer, and then the outside culture of my home, which was wherever, North America, Toronto, Michigan. That provides you with nuance, and that provides you with so many different perspectives on how people communicate, how people enjoy food, how people share food, and what people like value in terms of food. It's all different, and having that day-to-day experience gives you access and it gives you just access to a specific kind of nuance in which that you apply to your own food. It was the only creative outlet that I felt was productive enough that it wasn't a distraction from my studies, but it turned out to be a completely different branch of study on its own. And so I was self-taught just to do like Chinese home cooking at first, and then that graduated to doing pop-ups in the city where there was very few Chinese options here, very few, and no, at the time we were calling it authentic Chinese options here in Detroit. And so like I wanted to share the food that I knew how to make with some of the neighborhoods. Certainly at that point in time we had many open storefronts, and it was very, very easy to just like move into these empty places and just turn it into a restaurant for a day. My first experiences working in Eastern Market was for a secret kitchen called Salt and Cedar. They were a private kitchen and dining room experience behind a letterpress. So it was already like something totally like I call like millennial whimsical, where it's like, oh, of course there is like a bookbinder and letterpress next to a chicken slaughterhouse in a farmer's market in Detroit. And of course, if you walk through a curtain at the back of this letterpress, there is this giant table surrounded by books and art and artifacts, and just this tiny little stove way in the back with no ventilation, because the whole thing was completely not legal. And not that anything I did after that really was, but that one was particularly because we were serving wine, we were cooking food for people, and it was just like my introduction to like the theater of dining. So once they closed up shop, I decided to take that model and do my own version of it. And that's where like Kung Food Market Studio came from. And for there, it was pretty much a lot of the same, but it was my food. It was more food focused. And that is when I started to do like tasting menus based off of things like Hayao Miyazaki film and stuff. And this was in 2011, 2012. It was still kind of like a novel idea, I think, back then. And it did well locally. It certainly got me, like, I had a lot of respect in the industry locally. We were all friends with each other, all the chefs that had the biggest restaurants at the time here. We were all hanging out, we were all doing pop-ups together. And yeah, I just had my little space, and it was like it was a magical time, but it was at the cost of at the great physical cost of me. I'm still tired from it. It became people's only window to the outside world. And that's when I was like, okay, this isn't just a little thing anymore. This has become a community. And so people were just talking about their experiences during the pandemic, getting to know other people outside of their own homes, their apartments and stuff, sharing what is going on. Lots of grassroots reporting and news was happening, especially during the Black Lives Matter movement. Was one of the fastest ways to know what was going on. I was like, well, this is absolutely special.
Yeah.
And so like I wanted to do something. Like I was stuck inside. I was obviously not feeding anybody or not letting anyone into the studio, but I had this studio space where that was just meant to make food in. So I turned the phone around and I started making these terrible, cringy videos. I remember they're still up there. If you scroll down far enough, you'll see the first ones. I was too scared to speak in them. I was too scared to show my face in them for whatever reason. And things just started to take off from there. And once things got better, we were allowed to grocery shop. I started going from survival food to things I had been doing the years prior, showing off the food that I was making for the dinners and stuff. Then things really took off. Then I got my first brand deal partnership, was with Funimation. And at the time, they were the biggest anime distributor in the country. Now they are still, but they're merged with someone else. But that's also when I found out, I was like, oh, this is like a career. And they make a lot more money than cooks do. Validation that I got from the internet for showing off some of the things that I was doing here was just really affirming, because even though I had a lot of local support here, the people who appreciated me in Detroit and appreciated what I was doing in Detroit, unfortunately, were all cooks and artists who have no money. And so I was struggling at the time, and the people who did have money, like people in the suburbs and stuff, like had no real appreciation for the type of creative stuff that we were doing. And so it was really, really difficult. And to see that I was able to be able to reach like a mainstream audience like that with something as simple as like 1 out of the 12 dishes I would be cooking for a sit-down dinner, it like really just gave me like a creative jolt and so much more confidence in exploring other ways of expressing myself through food. And that ultimately led me to tackle the ideas of identity and what does it mean to like be a Chinese American, and how does that translate into the things that I make for people to eat. I don't think I ever would have like thought to do that if it wasn't for that like initial I guess that is that initial validation from people. And then I would take on those topics of identity, and to hear back from people who had never heard the term third culture before, and being like, oh my gosh, this is my entire life. This is exactly the thing that I have been living this whole time, and I just didn't know there was a term for it. And it is pretty, like, especially if you like being an Asian in the Midwest, it's pretty lonely. It can be pretty lonely. We don't have neighborhoods, and we don't have communities like they have in Queens or in Los Angeles. And so to have people like that reach out and talk and express themselves and share their experience of just because I decided to put curry in pasta, or to put like Italian noodles or Italian ravioli with chili oil and stuff, and just be like, hey, this is like an expression of how my experience is here. Like, that's pretty amazing. Like, everybody needs to grow up eventually, and the stuff that we were doing then, it took youth, it took excitement, and it took a lot of energy, because you need a lot of energy if you're going to put all of that time and effort into something for that little pay, or sometimes no pay. But now, like, it's like the scene matured with us, which I don't think is an experience that a lot of people can get anywhere. I'm not saying that there was nothing here in Detroit. Like, there has always been really amazing and interesting things to do here. But the fact of the matter is, like, we were part of that wave of people who initially brought more, I think, and we were doing it, a lot of us at least were doing it to the best of our ability in service to our communities that had taken us in and had accepted us. In my case, it was the market. Like, I feel like I owe that farmers market everything, because they were just so good to me, so accepting of what I was doing creatively. And so, yeah, and out from that, you see, and I think from those interesting things that we were doing, other people started to take notice. It wasn't just an outsider's problematic view of what Detroit was commonly referred to as. No, it was in the interesting city. It was an artist's haven. All of those things. And of course, after the artists, you get gentrification, and there you go. It's a story everybody knows. It's great to see that, I guess, where in the past it was just spunk and energy, now you have like professionalism and investment, and you have the finishing touches that are so nice to like fine and interesting restaurants, and as well as like the money to back up other people's creative endeavors, and hopefully bringing more of that into the city. We are suffering a pretty massive labor shortage right now, because we're growing faster than we can support in terms of like new places. But I guess like those growing pains are it's a good problem to have. At the end of the day, we're getting more spaces. I would love to see more. I would love to see more diverse food options. I would love to get a Din Tai Fung in here. I would love to get some dim sum. I would love to get some Chinese food that I didn't have to cook myself. But you know, one step at a time. I would like to see Detroit and the outer suburbs realize that the most interesting things that come out of this city oftentimes have to leave to be recognized by people within Michigan themselves. We have a huge problem in recognizing local talent, to the point where like people here will ignore a promising young chef-driven restaurant downtown, but they'll line up around the block for Shake Shack. There's nothing wrong with Shake Shack, but at the same time, it's like everyone here is just they fall into the trap of being a basic bitch who just looks for brand recognition. There's so much creativity here in this city that we need to foster it, and we really need to stop telling them to leave first. We don't tell them outright, but through our own actions, we tell them to leave. And then they make it big outside, and hopefully they come back. No, keep them here. I think otherwise, if we don't do that, the future of Detroit as a city will be very cookie cutter. We're in an era of globalization and nationalization where like so many things are just the same everywhere, whether it be architecture, it can be food too. Like it's just so much of the same. But in Michigan, we're at such an advantage because we have agriculture and we have diversity and we have homegrown talent, and we need to foster that. And if we don't, then we're just going to be like any other boring downtown